Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for the Florida Project Learning Tree Virtual Professional Development Experience. And this is part one of the experience, which is the webinar. And again, for those of you who may not have heard it, I apologize if you had any difficulties joining this morning. There was an unforeseen glitch with the way the registration was set up in terms of the password, but you're all here, so that's great. And if I look a little distracted at times, I might be trying to address emails from other participants that are frantically trying to join in, and I'm going to do my best to multitask, which is never a good thing, but we'll try. So welcome. We're so glad you're here. My name is Jessica Ireland, and I am the coordinator of Florida Project Learning Tree, and I work for the University of Florida School of Forest Resources and Conservation. So we'll do our best to avoid a webinar like this, although I think we've already done a pretty good job at, at exemplifying how technology can be both a blessing and a curse. But just real quickly wanted to go over some tips for participating using Zoom. I know at this point, a lot of us are pretty familiar with Zoom and other webinar platforms, but just wanted to quickly go through some tips. So everyone is muted at this point. And we're just going to try to keep muted unless you have a question that you'd like to ask. And when we go into our breakout groups to unmute then, but otherwise we'll stay muted to avoid background noise. Right now, you can have your video on or not, but to deal with broadband issues, it's best to keep your video off for most of the webinar. Again, when we go into those smaller breakout rooms, we will ask you to turn those on because it's more interactive that way. Please do use the chat feature throughout the webinar to ask any questions or provide any comments. We'll address some of the questions and comments throughout the webinar, but we'll also have some dedicated times for discussion. You can also raise your hand by clicking on participants, finding your name, clicking on the menu, and then raising hand. So that's another way if you have a specific question, want to raise your hand. And then also there are view options. If you're not in full screen, it's best to be in full screen, especially when we're sharing a presentation. When we are in full screen, you have some different video layout options. You can use the active speaker view by clicking on that red square. You can have a gallery view strip by clicking on that button, and then a grid view by clicking on that button. I do find that when a presentation is going on, the active speaker mode is the most effective. So before we dive into more, I just want to start with a couple of polls. So first, I'd like to ask, what best describes your role? So if you could go ahead and answer that, and then I'll share the results. Okay, so it looks like we have majority K through 8 teachers, but also quite a few non-formal educators and forestry or natural resource professionals. So that's great. Actually, I need to show you the results. There you go. All right, and then the next question is, what age level do you typically work with or teach? All right, so we have, looks like slight majority of middle school, quite a number of elementary, a few or one early childhood, high school, some adult, and some that work with a wide range of ages. And then one more poll real quick. Do you currently use PLT or other environmental education programs in your classroom or programming? All right, so slight majority is no, but look forward to. So we're excited to have you here. And for those of you that already use PLT or other environmental education programs, we look forward to sharing some new ideas with you today. Okay, so next I wanted to ask for everybody to share where you're from, where you're participating from today. And so, yes. Does somebody have a question? Okay. And so to do that, what you need to do is to click on the view options and then annotate. And then you can either use, somebody already used a circle to draw.
View options and annotate? I have no idea. View options and annotate, yeah.
Did you get it?
No, 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 no. I refuse, and you tell them no. No, no.
Okay, somebody has their microphone on, and I just want to ask to mute to reduce any background noise. That would be great. So I see some Pasco, looks like Brooksville, Fort Pierce, Fort Lauderdale, Jacksonville, around the Cocoa Beach area, Madison. So pretty wide range. That's great. Martin County, maybe either Ocala or Daytona Beach. It's hard to tell. Tallahassee. So we're pretty much Miami. We're pretty much covering the whole state except maybe the far western panhandle. That's great. Okay. Okay, let me now clear. Okay, so real quickly wanted to introduce our amazing team of facilitators that we have with us today. Elise Cassie is the assistant coordinator for Florida Project Learning Tree, and she's also with the UF IFAS School of Forest Resources and Conservation. Dana Sussman is the senior forester with the Orlando District of Florida Forest Service, and she's also a Florida PLT steering committee member. Dawn Perez is an education specialist with the Solid Waste Authority of Palm Beach County. Janet Schnaus is the elementary science specialist with Duval County Public Schools. Karen Johnson is the science academic coach at Shields Middle School for the Hillsborough County School District and also a PLT steering committee member. Marnie Richards is environmental education coordinator with the Florida Wildlife Federation. Sue Flack is the recycling education and marketing coordinator with the Solid Waste Disposal District, Indian River County, and also a Florida PLT steering committee member. So thank you so much to this amazing team of facilitators that's going to lead us through PLT activities today. So real quickly wanted to check in with you all on what your expectations for this training are. So if you could just quickly share one or two expectations using the chat feature, that would be wonderful. All right, so let's see what we've got here. Oh, and then we had a couple other folks responding to the location in the chat. So we had Polk County and Collier. So lessons to share with students to learn how to integrate my CS classes. Lesson ideas to bring more environmental education into the classroom, more nature-based lessons, 7th curriculum. Just new education and training for uses in classes and programs. Oh, good, Anna, you made it on.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, welcome.
Thank you.
To learn more ways to integrate environmental education awareness, science lessons for 4th grade, nature-based enrichment programming, for incorporating into reading lessons, engaging activities to share with students to improve online teaching skills, and learn hands-on and engaging environmental awareness lessons. So that's wonderful. There's quite a range of expectations, and we're going to do our best to try to meet all of those. And again, with today, as you know, Project Learning Tree is a hands-on program that engages youth in activities to explore the environment, both indoors and outdoors. Given our situation with COVID-19, we're all learning how to adapt what we do for a virtual learning experience. So throughout the webinar today, be thinking about how the activities you experience could be adapted in a different way for a virtual environment or for an in-person environment. And share any ideas that you have in the chat and also in the discussion times. So our objectives today, we're going to experience a virtual tree ID hike. We're going to explore and participate in some activities from the pre-K through 8 environmental education activity guide. We're going to identify strategies and share ideas for incorporating PLT in the work we do, and learn about resources and how to stay connected. So right now we're in the welcome review agenda objectives. We're going to do a quick intro to PLT. You'll get a more thorough intro in the web online training portion. We're going to do a PLT activity called We All Need Trees as an icebreaker, a virtual tree ID hike, 3 more PLT activities, tree cookies, water wonders, web of life, and discussion breakout groups. Again, learn about resources, and then a wrap up with how to access the second part of the training. So real quick introduction to PLT. Project Learning Tree is an initiative of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, or otherwise known as SFI. SFI is an independent nonprofit organization dedicated to the future of forests and promoting sustainable forest management. SFI collaborates on forest-based conservation, research, and community initiatives that enhance our quality of life and demonstrate the life-sustaining value of forests. Through Project Learning Tree, SFI is working to ensure that today's youth become effective future leaders with a strong understanding of the value of responsibly managed forests and the importance of sustaining our natural resources. The goals of Project Learning Tree are to provide students with awareness, appreciation, skills, and commitment to address environmental issues, enable them to apply scientific processes and higher order thinking skills to resolve environmental problems, acquire appreciation and tolerance of diverse viewpoints on environmental issues, and develop attitudes and actions, encourage creativity, originality, and flexibility to resolve environmental problems and issues, and inspire and empower students to become responsible, productive, and participatory members of society. So Project Learning Tree has a multi-pronged approach to the work that it does. One is the award-winning instructional materials. There are curriculum materials available for early childhood all the way through high school or even college and adult. Curriculum materials are available to educators through high-quality professional development. And there is a really vast network of national PLT, state PLT programs, international PLT programs, facilitators such as the team of facilitators that I introduced earlier, educators such as yourself, and then the youth that you all reach with PLT. So PLT curriculum is multidisciplinary and hands-on. The main premise of PLT is teaching students how to think, not what to think about environmental issues. So it's how to use critical thinking, problem solving, decision-making skills to think about these complex issues. All of the lessons can be easily incorporated into existing curriculum or used in informal settings. And if you are a formal classroom teacher, 5 of the curriculum guides are aligned to Florida standards, and I'll provide a little bit more detail on that later. In Florida, again, Project Learning Tree is sponsored by the UF IFAS School of Forest Resources and Conservation. Elisa and I are the 2 staff members for the program. We have an incredible 17-member steering committee, a statewide network of facilitators all over the state, and we also have a PLT school and environmental education center program. So what we're going to do now is we're going to shift to getting to know each other a little bit more and learn about a PLT activity called We All Need Trees. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Elise Cassie.
Okay,
Thanks, Jessica. So I'm going to try to shorten this activity up just a little bit so we stay on time. And right now is the time that we're going to share our favorite tree product. So hopefully you have your tree product handy. We won't be able to share right now for everybody, but we will have an opportunity later on that everybody will be able to share their products. So if you can please raise your hand, and if you would like to share, I have to, let's see if I can do that. For some reason, I'm not getting a gallery view here, but can you see raised hands, Jessica? Because I am not seeing.
Okay, well, we'll manual hand raising.
Well, that's great.
Laura Pachter has her hand up.
Okay, that's great, Laura. Can you share yours, please? What is your favorite tree product? And okay, great.
You can unmute, Laura.
You can unmute.
I actually mine is the pencil, and honestly, I did not realize how I created these, but I was up in Canada, and part of our tour was showing us how they harvest the trees to make pencils. And at first I was like, where are we? You know, and then they showed me these huge trees that these pencils came from, and I was pretty impressed. So this is one of my favorites, and I use it all the time because the pens run out of ink, you know, at the worst time. So I tend to use a pencil if I'm not writing a check. So I find the pencil to be it's something that we don't even realize until I took the tour of the trees up in Canada, how important trees are to, you know, what we use every day. So my favorite.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. Okay, does anybody else? Jessica, if you could help me, because like I said, I'm not.
Yeah, so Donna, if you want to just unmute, you feel free to go ahead and share. And then
yeah, great.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, Donna.
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, I type wood, and also to help us with shelter and paper. I love to write, so you know that's some of my favorite tree products.
Great. And I'm Donna. Okay? I wasn't sure. I couldn't hear you very well, but.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Did you hear my response?
Yeah, we heard you. Yeah. So wood provides shelter, which is wonderful, and then paper. You love to write. Use paper very regularly, so that's great.
Great.
I don't see the option to raise my hand. That's why I typed.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. You have to go to participants and then find your name and then click on the menu. It's kind of clunky. So
okay, got you. Okay.
No worries. Feel free to just use the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Christina wrote paper towels. I'm always wiping after my kids. Yep, totally get that.
I love that. That's great.
And then sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Meliana. Miss Milena. Hi, Milena. Sorry about that.
Shade.
I did see a little hand.
Right now, shade is very important.
Oh, yeah, shade. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Oh, great. Okay, these are great. Okay, how about a few more and then we can move on? Somebody else said a pencil. That was Mark. Very useful.
So I think I took a different approach to tree product, but I chose this bowl that's made out of a coconut. I use it like all the time. And then I guess more literally, this is just a slice of a tree. And I have a few of these that I use as coasters.
Great. We call those tree cookies in PLT land. That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have a good sampling of some tree products. I really appreciate you sharing them, and we'll have an opportunity, like I said, in a few minutes to share some more. But so that brings me to my question: what does a pencil, a cinnamon stick, and a sponge have in common? I'm sure many of you know it, but if you were in first grade, that may be a little trickier question. But they all come from trees. If you haven't guessed that yet. I'm also seeing Kelly mention that apples are one of her favorite tree products. So, and here's a fun fact: there are over 5,000 products made from trees. So that's quite a lot of use of trees. So this activity is called We All Need Trees, and it has two primary objectives. And Jessica, if you could put the objective slide up. Jessica's much better at multitasking than I am, so I'm asking Jessica to help me with this. So. Oop, you got to unmute.
It should be up.
Oh, really?
Are you not seeing it?
Not seeing it, which is very odd.
All right, real quick, I'll do it again.
Yeah, that is really weird. Oh, okay, there we go. Thank you. I don't know why I wasn't seeing it, but anyway. So students will examine different products and determine which products are made from trees is one objective, and the other objective is students will describe ways trees are used to make products and ways products can be conserved. So that's the two primary objectives of this activity. We're going to be experiencing the younger, basically kindergarten through second grade version today. This activity also provides opportunities for classifying and categorizing, and for older students, older elementary students, group work, research and writing opportunities, and evaluation practice. So we all need trees experience today is we're going to categorize our favorite tree products. So see, anybody who wanted to share and couldn't, now is our opportunity. We're going to be using our whiteboard feature. So you're going to put your tree product under one of the three categories: paper, wood, or food. And if you're unfamiliar with how to use that, you can go up to the top of your screen. You'll see view options. And then you can click on the annotate button, which brings up tools. And then you'll see a text tool. And you can actually click on that and write in your tree product under one of the categories. Check marks work too, but if you can type it in, I'd love to see what your tree product is. I'm seeing 2 wood. These categories are for younger students, and we can talk about what you can do for older students in a little bit. But okay, good. Key limes, yum. I'm thinking about pie. We have a bowl, a tree cookie, paper, watercolor paper.
I also see TP and books under paper. Yeah.
Okay. I'm moving my screen around to see that. Now I'm getting hungry with this food category. Great. Okay. All right. Does anybody else want to write down their product? Tinker Toys. Yay. Okay, great. It looks like everybody has a good understanding at this point of which categories their products are under, or favorite products. Chestnuts, it looks like, depends on if we're using wood or the actual chestnuts. So really that could go under either category.
Yeah, and I see it actually kind of got hidden under the root beer, but it's also under food.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Great. Well, thank you so much. So this is a virtual adaptation of this activity. If you're in a classroom, you would have the product spread out, and you can have students get up and move them around if you want to do that. But this activity is 2 parts. Essentially, the first part is tree detectives, which you just experienced, and it involves classifying products into groups using pictures, or of course actual products if you're in person. And if you could put up the list, the goods from the wood slide. Yeah. So for older students, we can expand the categories reflected in the list to the left. That list is included in your book under this activity. And you'll see that it's, for younger students, certainly the 3 categories would work fine, but as they get older, you can expand them and look at gums and resins and cellulose, which is a huge, huge product that's, or tree ingredient that is used in so many products. So the second part is part B is tree treasures, and it involves dividing students into teams of 4, and they work together to determine which products are made from trees or have an ingredients from trees. All team members need to agree, and if a product is to be put in the tree product list. So once the lists are complete, then each team gets tree readings, which I think we have a slide for that, just to show what they are. They're very short, but they also explain a little bit more about products. One talks about paper, another about gums and resins. So after each team reads their tree readings, then you ask them to reevaluate. Are there any other products that need to go in their list or be removed from their list? Okay, I think, Jessica, I'm thinking that maybe we just do one of the 2 videos to save time. So the first, yeah, and I'm thinking, let's do the sawmill one. So we're going to look at an overview of what happens to trees after they're cut and go to a sawmill. And it's kind of an impressive operation. It's just such a huge operation. So we'll just view one video for this segment.
We've seen trees grow and we've seen trees cut down, but what happens to the tree after it hits the mill is just the start of its next journey. This is fantastic. I feel like sensory overload. The smell is wonderful. Where are we right now?
Well, we're in the log yard portion of the sawmill in Perry, Georgia. Every species has their own smell. You know, some people love the smell of southern yellow pine. Almost everybody loves the smell of cedar, but all sawmills typically smell pretty good if you like the smell of wood.
What do you guys do here?
So our main job here is to safely convert logs into lumber to be sold for end use with the customer.
So when I see logs going down the highway on a huge truck, is it coming here?
They're all coming here, hopefully all the good ones.
And then what happens?
So as you can see behind us, the logs will show up in trucks. They'll be weighed at a scale. Once they get into the log yard behind us, they'll be unloaded, put into the crane pile. After a couple of days, they'll be loaded into the mill and processed into lumber.
About how many shipments do you guys get in a day?
We run about 75 semi-trucks full of logs each day.
That is a lot of trees.
Most of these logs come from land owned privately versus land owned by the government. All of these logs come within a 100-mile radius of this plant site. There's such a plentiful supply of logs all throughout Georgia that we don't have to travel long distances to bring them back.
And then when you have the finished product, where does it go after that?
There's a number of uses for our finished product. Some goes into fence building, some goes into making pallets, some is for building trusses and doors and walls inside houses. And each type of wood, every piece is graded so we know where that piece could be used.
So your products go through testing and receive grades kind of like us.
That's right. Once it's graded, it'll get banded, it'll get strapped, we'll put a package on it, and it'll be ready for shipment to the customer.
And all of that happens right here in the lumber yard?
All the product gets made here and shipped from here. So if you're out in your yard looking at your fence or even looking at your home, there's a very good chance, being one of the largest lumber producers in the region, that that wood came from Interfor.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that. And it just shows the scale of the operation and how large it is. And it's pretty impressive to visit a sawmill. And if there's any opportunity to take students sometime in the future to a sawmill, there's definitely several around the state that, you know, if you have access to, or we can even help you if needed to look at one, because it's very impressive. So there's 2 additional activities or suggestions under the enrichment section of this activity. All PLT activities have this. I like to call them extension activities. One is called Make a Tree Treasure. And yeah, if you could put that one up. So a class can make a treasure tree with a dead branch, or using an old Christmas tree, and then hang pictures of products, or actually hang products on it. But I also like the student version as well. That's not in the guide, but I had a little time on my hands and thought, wouldn't that be great? So I put the student one together. You can see it's very easy to make with a paper towel roll, taping it to a cardboard base, and then using the pencils for branches, and then using Chanel sticks to attach some of the products. And this can be used for an art project. Of course, if your students are probably a little more creative than I am with some paint and maybe providing a canopy for the tree, but it's also could be a launch for some research that they can do on their tree products. And let's see, the last enrichment one is an extension activity that we typically use as an icebreaker. And if you could put that, thank you so much. So it's fun as an icebreaker for educators, as you can see, or it's fun for use with students. You tape a product onto a student's back, and the student only can ask each person two yes or no questions, and they must move to the next person until they discover their product, kind of a shortened version of 20 questions. And it's a wonderful way to get students up and moving around, and it's also a lot of fun as well. So we produced some cards that
Are you is there paper or something going in front of your microphone? Because there's a lot of
scratchy sound. Thank you.
That's better. Yeah.
I have no idea what that would have sounded like. Sorry, guys. But we do have product cards that you'll have access to. And what it is a picture on the front. And I think we have one more slide, if you could scroll it down. There we go. And so, so it's a product on the front and a little description on the back. So if you decide you want to use this with your students, you'll have them ready-made for you. Or actually, you can download them and you can put them together, but at least they're available for you. And other resources as well that you'll have access to after we finish. So that concludes this little activity. It was shortened a little bit, but I hope you got something out of it that you'll be able to use virtually or in person. And are there any questions associated with this activity?
Thanks, Elise. And again, as Elise mentioned, we're going to send you a bunch of resources that she mentioned related to this activity, those tree product cards, some cards to set up your own tree treasure, like she mentioned. And this is activity 13 in the guide, if you want to make note of that. When you do the online training, you'll be spending some time doing what we call a hike through the guide, learning how to use all the different appendices and indices to learn how to find the right activities to meet your needs. So thanks a lot, Elise, and thanks everybody for sharing your tree products. And so now we're going to turn it over to Dana Sussman. Again, she's a senior forester with the Orlando district of the Florida Forest Service, and she's going to take us on a virtual tree ID hike.
Good morning, my name is Dana Sussman. I'm a senior forester with the Florida Forest Service, and I wanted to thank everybody for participating today, for being teachers, for being educators, such an important job, made even more challenging these last few months. But I have children who are in school, and we have many favorite teachers, and so I'm so glad to be talking to you today. I work in the Orlando area, which means I'm close to the University of Central Florida campus, and they have an arboretum, and we're going to take kind of a virtual tour of the arboretum today and learn a little bit about tree identification. So arboretums are botanical gardens essentially devoted to trees, and UCF's Arboretum was set up to provide students, staff, and visitors opportunities to explore and learn about Florida's diverse ecosystems and the places the plant life they support. I have a few icons up here of different arboretums. Some you may have been to. Some are small, some are large, some do a lot of research, and some are primarily places for people to go. And in our conditions right now, many outdoor places are welcoming visitors and can be a wonderful way to spend part of your day. So the UCF Arboretum has a somewhat formal area but we're going to explore the natural area. And it really is an outdoor laboratory used to teach about flora and fauna native to Florida. And it's actively managed by staff and students in the Landscape and Natural Resources Department of the university. It's a small area, relatively speaking, about 800 acres, but within that there are 8 different ecosystem types. And we're going to focus on the first 4 today during our hike: scrubby flatwoods, scrub, mesic flatwoods, and wet flatwoods. So this shows you a map of the area we're going to visit. The different colored trails wind through different ecosystems. And like I said, it's about 800 acres, but with all the meandering trails, you can get a couple-mile hike in. So we're going to focus today on learning a few trees, go through some of the methods we use for identification. And all these trees grow at the UCF Arboretum. I visited a few times and took some photos. So the photos you see are from the Arboretum. And we'll just talk a little bit, and you'll see from the map the complexity of the ecosystems at the Arboretum. So I mentioned we're going to focus on 4 different ecosystems and learn about a few trees that grow in each. The scrubby flatwoods, and again, these pictures are all taken at the Arboretum. The scrub, mesic flatwoods, and mesic is another word for kind of wet or in between dry and wet, and then wet flatwoods. So for our virtual visit, I just want you to sit back, relax. What you see on the screen are some of the things you might need if you went out there today, or you definitely would need if you went out there today. If you can imagine yourself walking the trails, think of the things you might hear, you might see, you might smell. We just heard about how wonderful the smell of a sawmill is. Out at the Arboretum, you'll smell pine needles, wildflowers, a lot of different aromas. But because we're doing a virtual walk, we don't need sunscreen. I couldn't figure out a way to get you, your steps added up for taking our virtual walk today, but there's no mosquitoes. So kind of a balance of what you're missing and what you will avoid by staying indoors today. So you see the map has some A through E on it. Those are going to be our stops during our trail hike. The trails are very well marked. You see the trail marker, that would be a junction of the orange and the yellow trails, which have some common area as you hike them. So we're going to start at A, which is the pavilion. This is, I think it's called Gemini Parkway, and the Arboretum is all to the east of Gemini Parkway at the UCF campus. The Arboretum is free to visit, open from sunrise to sunset. You just have to find parking, which usually you have to pay for, but throughout the state, there are many kind of hidden treasures like this, and finding out what those are near you can really provide you with a great place to go with your students or with a group. So the Arboretum has a nature pavilion, which is available to be reserved, the Timothy R. Newman Nature Pavilion, and we're going to start our walk here. If you were actually at the Arboretum, you might bring a nature journal with you. You might do some leaf collecting. Because this is a virtual tour, maybe you're going to do some origami leaf construction, or maybe just trace existing leaves to put in your journal. And then I've listed 4 or 3 PLT activities that you could do while you're on your walk or after the walk: the sounds around, poetry, and name that tree. And we will return to this slide at the very end. So if you don't get a chance to write down those PLT activity numbers now, you'll get a chance at the end of the tour. So when we're out and about, we see green, we see trees, but how do we know what specific trees we are looking at? So we're going to talk briefly about how we identify a tree, and as I mentioned, learn a few of the ones that are growing at the Arboretum. So dendrology is the term used for the science of tree identification, and this University of Florida IFAS publication is a great one for reading through about the various characteristics you might look at when you're trying to identify a tree. There are keys that can be used, and they are called dichotomous, which means you have two choices, A or B, yes or no, and that leads you through to your final identification. And the things you'll be asked about when you're using the key are the leaf arrangement, and this is opposite. You see the leaves come out of the branch opposite each other, or alternate, where you have the staggering of the leaves on the branch. We might look at leaf type. Is it a broad leaf, like hickory or elm, or is a needle-like leaf, like a pine tree? Some trees have very distinctive bark. The bark you see here is from a persimmon tree, sometimes called alligator bark. And as you get to know trees better, sometimes all you need to do is look at the trunk and you'll know what kind of tree that is. Flowers and fruits can range from showy to insignificant, but again, sometimes they can be sort of the final indicator of the tree that you are identifying. But leaves and leaf arrangement, leaf type and leaf arrangement are what's used most to identify trees. So I mentioned the opposite. Only a few broadleaf trees have this arrangement: maple, ashes, dogwoods, a few others. So if you see the opposite leaf arrangement, and again, the leaves come out of the same place on the twig, you know your choices list is pretty narrow. If you see alternate, and you see here we have a leaf and then another leaf kind of back and forth, most broadleaf trees have this type of leaf arrangement. And during our tour, we'll see sweet gum and loblolly bay. Leaf type, broadleaves are primarily hardwood trees. Most of them are deciduous, but there are some exceptions. Needle-like leaves are primarily softwoods, pines, spruces, firs. Most of those are evergreen, but there's a few exceptions to that rule. The parts of the leaf can be helpful in identifying the tree, not just the leaf type, but you see here we have a petiole or a stem on the leaf. We have the margin or the edge of the leaf. We have the tip, the midrib, and then the veins. And then the lamina is what's in between. Sometimes that can be distinctive. This is from a red maple, and you can see the petiole here is a distinct red color. So sometimes that would be the final characteristic you see that will confirm the type of tree you're looking at. So we've left the nature center, and now we're going to be hiking. We can either go this way, or we could go around this way to be and look at the scrubby flatwoods. And you can see that the different, on the map, the different ecosystems are actually noted. So in a small area, you have quite a diversity of ecosystem types, which can be great if you are trying to compare what grows in one site versus one ecosystem versus another. So in the scrubby flatwoods, you would be likely to see longleaf pine and maybe some slash pine. So how are we going to tell those two trees apart? They look very similar in these photos. You see a lot of needles on a branch, and then you see clusters of needles. These are called fascicles or bundles. And what do we notice about this one versus these here? And these both come from this tree, and this would be what you'd find on this tree. So we see we have 3 needles in a fascicle, but here we have both 3 and 2 needles in fascicles, which you would find on the tree. So on the left, if we would know that longleaf pine has 3 needles in a fascicle, we could confirm that this is longleaf pine. Also, the way the needles are clustered at the end of the branch is a distinct characteristic. And on the right, we have slash pine, which typically has bundles of both 2 and 3, fascicles of 2 and 3. When trees are young, they often look quite different than when they mature. Longleaf pine is like a clump of grass when it's young. As it matures, grows, it really doesn't produce many branches until it's quite tall, maybe 8 to 10 foot tall. These slash pine you can see look like almost like miniature mature trees with the many branches that they have. So sometimes you don't have a mature tree to use the leaves or bark or anything from, you have to look at the juvenile, and knowing what they look like at that stage can be helpful with identification. Two other trees you might find in the scrubby flatwoods are sand live oak and live oak. And you see from the leaf photos that they look somewhat similar, but how are we going to tell them apart? So when we look at a leaf, I mentioned the broad versus needle-like. So here we do have broad leaves. And then the margins or the edges, if you can look, you see these are much more rolled under, or what's called revolute, than these leaves. There's a little bit of turning here, but not much. And as we become more familiar with oaks, we know that sand live oak has this very distinct rolling under of its leaves, and live oak does roll under a little, but not nearly so much. Now, you may say, well, that's easy to see the difference when you have them right next to each other. And it can be a challenge sometimes when you don't have something to compare your specimen to say, well, I know it's different than this other specimen, so it must be a different type of tree. Trees also sometimes try to fool us a bit. Their juvenile leaves or shade leaves can be larger, oftentimes a different shape. So sometimes the smaller trees can actually be harder to identify with a broadleaf tree. But again, the leaf margin here can often be very helpful in determining what type of tree it is. So now we're moving on to the scrub, and just like these other trails, you can take a long way around depending on what the weather's like, or you can just make a beeline to see to the scrub. There is a little, I don't know if you can see on your map, there's a little hammock here, which is just a tiny bit higher in elevation than the surrounding area. The soils are a little bit better. It's a beautiful place. There's picnic tables, shade, and so it's a lovely spot to take a break if you're out and it's hot. So we're at point C here in the scrub. And these are some of the trees you might see in the scrub. Sand live oak. There are some trees which have a wide range of site conditions in which they grow. But the new trees, we would see sand pine, myrtle oak, Chapman oak, and then saw palmetto. And you notice here from the photo, the whitish sand, very little soil moisture here. So the trees and plants that grow here have adapted to low moisture availability. Sand pine, again, we have needle-like foliage. They do come in fascicles, but if we compare longleaf, slash, and then sand pine, you see fascicles of 2, but very short. It's not as beautiful a pine to some people as the majestic longleaf or the slash pine, but it is a pine that can grow in the scrub area where other pines cannot. They don't have enough soil moisture. We already talked about sand live oak, and again, using the margin to help us identify. Also, you see the bottom of the leaf. Sometimes that's a distinctly different color or lighter shade than the top of the leaf and can help with identification. Two other oaks we might see, and they don't get very big. They can almost just look bushy as opposed to a tree. We have myrtle oak and Chapman oak. They do look similar, but as you look closer, you see these leaves just tend to bend a little bit more than these leaves. So that would help you in your identification. But sometimes without a key, without good photos, it can be a challenge to be certain of your identification. Saw palmetto is not a tree. It is more of a grass, or what's called a monocot. It has a very wide range of conditions in which it will grow. So you'll see it in the scrub, and then a little bit later on, we'll see it in, here it is in the mesic flatwoods, and we may even find it in the wet flatwoods. So there are some plants that are what we call indicator plants, and if you see them, you know pretty certainly what kind of soils you have or what the growing conditions are like. But there's others that have adapted to a wide range of growing conditions. So even though we're talking about tree ID today, you can see that there's many ways you can branch off and talk about other topics as you go on your virtual walk. The xeric hammock, this is what I mentioned. There's picnic tables. It's just really a delightful place, more shade. So you're You don't see the soils necessarily because the leaf litter stays around longer because it doesn't decay as quickly and dry up in the sun. So now we've been in this general area and we're going to move over here. And there actually is, this is a little bit higher in elevation than these lower parts. So we're going to have more moisture availability down here. We're going to see a few different trees that have adapted to wetter sites. So as we walk here, you see that we're very close to houses, residences. So managing a property like this in an urban area can be a challenge, but they do prescribe burn. They do a lot of different management activities, and they figured out how to be compatible with the surrounding land use. So we're here on the Blue Trail, learning about mesic flatwoods, which I mentioned before, are kind of, they're not dry and they're not wet, but usually they trend more towards good soil moisture. We might see some of the same trees again, slash pine, saw palmetto, but we're also going to see some loblolly bay and cherry laurel trees. Cherry laurel and loblolly bay are sometimes used as landscape trees, so you might be familiar with those in a more urban setting. Loblolly bay has a beautiful white flower. Its leaves are fairly large, and you see this distinct, we talked about the midrib, very prominent here. This little red thing is not a blob on the photo, it's actually a leaf. They have an unusual characteristic where they'll just be random, brightly colored, trending reddish leaves in the canopy. And you can see in the this photo here, the start of that color change. So that these quirky characteristics sometimes can be a way to identify a tree. Cherry laurel, I mentioned most broadleaf trees are deciduous, but cherry laurel is evergreen along with live oak and scrub live oak. They are evergreen. It has a very distinct looking bark with that mottling. If you're familiar with sycamore trees and their distinct bark, sometimes you don't even need to look at the leaves. All you need to do is see the trunk and you know what it is. So now we're at our final stop, the wet flatwoods. And as it describes, trees that grow here need to be able to tolerate fairly wet conditions. And we might see bald cypress, red maple, sweet gum, pond pine, and then loblolly bay would be adapted. We might start to see some indicator plants like ferns, which are more tolerant of the wetter conditions. Cypress is a tree that can grow in standing water, bald cypress, but also can tolerate drier conditions. This is one of the rare trees with needle-like foliage that is not evergreen. It actually is deciduous and gets its common name bald cypress because in the winter it doesn't have any leaves on it. Pond pine, fascicles of 3, just like sand pine, but they're going to be a little bit longer. It has persistent cones. It has a bark that's an unusual color. And then it has adventitious sprouting, which means the needles are basically growing right out of the branches, kind of an odd characteristic. But if you're comparing the 4 pines here, longleaf, slash, sand, and pond, you should be able to, with a little closer examination, identify each one. We talked about leaf arrangement, opposite or alternate. These are 2 trees that we would see on the trail. So what's our arrangement here? Opposite, alternate, these are both broadleaf trees we could find in the flatwoods. So we have red maple in that distinct red petiole, the opposite leaf arrangement, and sweet gum, the alternate leaf arrangement, kind of a similar leaf shape, but no red petiole. So we would be able to tell the difference between these 2. And the leaf margin is serrate or toothed here, and this is called lobes, where they look like serrations, but they're much more widely spread apart. We talked about leaf collecting. I love doing that everywhere I go. I seem to be picking up leaves, but if you're on a virtual hike, it's kind of hard to do that. But you can just freehand draw. We mentioned origami. Maybe you collected leaves on a previous hike and you can do some leaf tracings. Anything to put in your nature journal. So now we're going to walk back past this beautiful pond to our pavilion, and that's where you sit down and maybe write some experiences in your journal of what you saw on the trail, maybe do some of the activities. PLT activities, or at least talk about thinking further around their topics. This is poetry. There's a poem form called Diamante poems, which is great for all ages. It certainly tests your remembrance of the different parts of speech, you know, participles and nouns, and can really draw out some interesting ideas about the same topic when you read people's poems. I wanted to mention that I work for the Florida Forest Service, and there are county foresters available to do school programs, to come to nature centers, to wherever you work. There's also other natural resource agencies, water management districts, the state park system, who have environmental educators or resource professionals who would love to come to a school and or provide you with materials that you can use. So now I've lost track of the time, so I don't know if any questions can be answered now, or I can look through the questions and then email the group the responses to those questions. This was my first attempt at a trees and forest Diamante poem. Again, they're a lot of fun, but challenging. So high school kids would be challenged somewhat, and also adults doing them. So thank you for the time. And again, I appreciate you being here today. And we'll move on to our next part of the program.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dana. That was wonderful. I hope everybody enjoyed that as much as I did. It's nice to take a virtual tour of a forest and learn so much. So thanks. And as Dana mentioned, the Florida Forest Service and your county foresters are certainly a fabulous resource to you. And so I will be providing you with contact information for all the facilitators today. And I'll also make sure to send you a link for how to find your local county forester. So what we're going to do now is we're going to transition back to doing some more PLT activities. We're going to experience 3 activities. Please feel free to ask questions or share ideas through the chat feature throughout the time that we're doing these activities. After each activity, we're going to go into breakout rooms, smaller group discussions, to think about how we might adapt or modify an activity for context or an audience and share ideas. So we're going to start with PLT activity number 76, and it's called Tree Cookies. And I'm going to turn it over to Dawn Perez now to lead us through this activity.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Now, let me just share my screen here. All right, here we go. So this is what the Tree Cookies activity number 76 looks like. And what I'm going to do is go into a little bit of background about what tree cookies are and how you can actually get them or order them, and then the parts of the tree cookie, and then we'll kind of go into more of the activity. So here are the objectives for the tree cookie activity. Participants will be introduced to and virtually examine cross sections of trees. They will infer from a tree's rings what environmental conditions might have occurred in its life, and then they'll correlate the time it takes a tree to grow with events in human history and in their own personal history. So this is a tree cookie. So if you guys aren't familiar with a tree cookie, what it is it's a cross section of either a fallen tree's branch or trunk. And it's about 1 inch to 2 inches thick. And it looks very similar to this. And so there are different parts of the tree. We'll start from the inside. We have the heartwood, which is very important. If the heartwood is damaged, the tree might not survive. Okay, so that gives growth, support, and strength. And then we have the xylem, which carries water from the roots to the leaves. We have the cambium, which is the growing layer that builds the cells. Then we have the phloem, which carries nutrients from leaves to the cambium. and we have the outer bark, which protects the tree. Now, at the Solid Waste Authority, we do this activity for elementary school. So we would only go into the heartwood and the outer bark typically. But if you're doing this with middle school or even high schoolers, then you can go into more of the different parts of the tree and, you know, connect it with photosynthesis and that kind of stuff. The growth rings, pretty cool. They have two growth rings. They have the lighter ones, which are the spring wood, and that's during kind of the wet spring season. Typically tends to be wider. And then you have the summer wood, which is narrow and dark and usually grown during the not so wet season. So between those two rings, that makes up 1 year of tree growth, okay? So these rings can tell us a lot. They can actually tell us the age of the tree if we count them. And then there are other things in these tree cookies that give us some hints as to what happened to that tree. So we're looking at a couple of different tree cookies here. And you'll notice, for instance, G. Okay, see this dark area here? That's actually a scar from a fire. So we can tell that that tree had been through a fire. In B, you can see this darker area outside of the heartwood. It's actually where there used to be a branch. So that's where there's a dead branch. Other things you can tell if there's been droughts or any kind of insect infestation, because the tree rings will be really thin in that area. And you can tell if the tree has had diseases and things like that. So this is a really interesting tree ring. I believe this is probably a dead branch here that you can see in this. And this one I think would be easy to count. So I'm going to actually count with you guys how old this tree is. So if we start, there's the heartwood. I like to count the dark rings because they're just easier for me to see. But you can count the light rings if you want to. So 1, 2, looks like 3, I would say 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I would say this tree is probably about 16 to 18 years old. And just to give you guys a reference, most trees that are used for paper have to be a minimum of 10 to 15 years old. Okay, so this is what you can do with the students. You can use a magnifying glass, have them look closer at the heartwood and the outer bark, look close at the tree rings, and then have them count the tree rings. Here's another type of tree cookie, just so you can see some differences in tree cookies. This one's from an eastern red cedar, a little bit different here. Here's another one, again, probably a dead branch, I would think. These dots, not very sure about that, but maybe that could be some kind of a disease or fungus. And so here's an example of an investigation. This is a first grade class. And again, you'll notice they have their magnifiers and they're counting the tree rings. And then you can actually have them draw the tree rings on a piece of paper. And one of the activities in the tree cookie investigation is actually having the students, after they look at the tree cookie, writing stories about their trees and what happened to their trees. Here's some student pages. So they do give you an example of a tree ring, so you can count it with the class if you don't have tree rings. Or tree cookies rather. But at the end of the presentation, we will show you some resources for where you can get those tree cookies. But just in case you don't have them, they do have a student page with a tree cookie. And then they also have a student page where the students can label the different tree cookie parts. And again, if it's elementary, you might just want to stick to the heartwood and the outer bark. But if it's middle school or high school, you can kind of delve more into the other parts. And then they have 3 examples of tree cookies below that have different things. So the first one is a dead branch, number 6. 7 is a drought because it's showing the rings closer together. So there wasn't enough rain and probably nutrients that year. And then 8 is showing you a scar from a fire. So one of my favorite variations of this activity is actually to create your own tree cookie. So you can create your life as a tree cookie. So what you're looking at here is a tree cookie that I've made. So I used a paper plate and colored pencils, but you can use crayons or markers, whatever works. And you'll notice I have my heartwood in the center. I have my cambium here. I have my outer bark, which is made up of those ridges on the paper plate. And then I have my tree rings. Now, since I'm a little old, not really that old, but since it would be kind of hard to put all the rings in there, I did it by 5s. And I mean, you could do this with students too, to teach them, you know, about counting in 5s, 10s, 20s if you want. So anyway, if you look at my life as a tree cookie, 5, 10, you go to the year number 10, I have a little scar there, right? That's where I actually sprained my ankle when I was 10 years old. If you move further out, let's see, 5, 10, 15, between 15 and 20, had a couple things that happened. When I was 18, I got the chicken pox. When I was 19, I actually tore my ACL. So I have another scar there. And then in my early 20s, I have another scar there. So you can either have them put, you know, scars there, but you can also have them put major life events. Maybe, you know, when I was 10 years old was when I got my first ear piercing. So maybe I'd put a little star there and that would be a positive life event there. You can also see in the earlier years that I grew a lot, right? And then slowed down as I got older. So I just think it's kind of cool that you can actually turn your life into a tree cookie and compare it to the tree cookies, which is pretty neat. Connections that you can make. I know we did talk about some enrichment, sorry, things. You can invite a forester to come in and talk to your class. And then for some of the younger students, these are some great books to connect to that activity as well. And then as Jessica had mentioned before, we do have, we do connect to the Florida State standards now. These are where you can get your tree cookies. So you can ask a local forester, you can purchase them online, or you can make your own. There's actually a section about getting ready that does kind of tell you how to make your own tree cookie. And then here are the standards that they align to, just so you guys can see that. And so now what we're going to do is we're actually going to break out into sessions, and you guys are going to create your own tree cookies. So you're going to create one of these, your life as a tree cookie, and we're going to discuss and share some ideas.
So real quickly, if I could have each group maybe share a key takeaway from your discussion, maybe starting with Janet's group.
Hi, so we talked about, and of course, focusing on the tree cookie activity is how we would adapt it. So we said for our lower grade levels, we might focus on you were born and then you started school and here's where you're at now. And then we said, you know, moving it on up to middle school, we're adding obviously a big point is moving to middle school. So it starts to expand as we go up the grade levels. And we thought that was pretty important.
Great, thanks, Janet. And how about Dana's group?
We talked about how for younger kids, you know, they'll draw 5 rings and that might be hard for them to distinguish, maybe doing something by months or half a year or something so that they'd have more opportunity. And then also the challenge of, you know, middle school and high school, how do you not make it so simplified that they don't, well, you want them to be involved, but how do you make the instructions or the commitment so that they're vested, and maybe doing narrative versus just symbols on the tree cookie.
Absolutely. And how about Dawn's group?
So my group had a lot of good ideas for modifications. The first one was some of them agreed that some of the students might have a hard time making circles. So maybe make a paper with a circle to begin with, just one big one, and then passing that out. They also had said that one of our members belongs to a nature center, and so she's not an in-school teacher, and so she said, you know, I'd have to make this a bit longer because we'd have an hour and a half to fill if I did this activity. So I had told her that what we do is we add leaf rubbings to it, binoculars, we do a hike, you know, added to that activity. Some other modifications, one of our members said they would like to make a key, for instance, maybe an X or a circle for something that was a little traumatic or negative, and then maybe a star or a heart for things that were positive. So I liked that suggestion as well.
Great, thanks. And how about Karen and Sue's group?
So we, Dawn, just to piggyback real quick on that, I love that what you said, because it really is a modification, just to remind everybody that this particular lesson can be meshed and weaved with so many other lessons in the book. So they do interrelate at some point. So we had the opportunity of having a high school teacher in our group, which was really cool today. And Mark was telling us, because he does teach virtual science, that perhaps he would use more of the technology link, especially when it came down to doing things virtually, and perhaps using Google Expedition or CoSpace, where the students can create their own environment full of trees, different trees, and then look at it and evaluate it. We also talked about the STEM briefly on the lines of including math, so talking about timelines, and circumference and those kind of standards that you could hit in that STEM related. So it was a good discussion.
Great.
Can I add something to what Susan just said? Also in the PLT, I believe it's the Southeast Climate module, they do have a very heavy math related activity where you measure the circumference and pretty much you calculate the carbon dioxide sequestration of those trees. So that would be really cool to add to that as well.
Great point, Dawn. And when you take the online course, you will get a brief introduction to the Southeastern Forest and Climate Change module. It is one that is available for free on the PLT website. So, and it's geared towards high school. So for those of you that are working with the older grades, that's a great resource. And finally, Marnie's group.
Okay, Karen's going to speak for us.
Yeah.
Okay.
We talked a lot about the same things and making it cross-curricular. So like for the math, being able to figure out how far apart and how many lines to make, social studies with making a legend or a key, and then letting kids switch theirs and come up with what they thought they stood for. And then with ELA, bringing in the writing pieces and having them write about the different events to go with their tree cookie. And then as far as sharing it digitally, we talked about using different platforms, maybe to create the tree cookie instead of just on paper, they could do it as in a digital platform somehow.
We see here, this is activity 44 in our book, and this is something that I taught every year as a 5th grade teacher and as a middle school teacher. Depending on my years, I modified it. Marnie, if you can go to the next screen. So we are going to do this activity, and if you saw earlier, we'd asked for you to get some dice and a copy of the water cycle scorecard and the pre-made station cards. If you just copied those, we're just going to walk through this activity in a little bit, and of course a copy of the student page. Marnie, if you could go to the next. So when I'm teaching this activity, and again, I was a classroom teacher, science only, 5th grade, and then middle school, and I did I taught FLVS high school science. I did not do this with my FLVS, so curious about that one. But for this, we do need to know the basic steps of the water cycle before the students do the activity. So they would need to understand evaporation, condensation, precipitation, runoff. So I always prepared them with the vocabulary. They also need to understand the basics about how water can change states. So they need to understand the solid, liquid, gas, and how water would change. And that's a standard that they would already cover. And then the last thing I think that is super important is the kids need to understand the basic reservoirs that water would be going to. Some of them they know, but they might not be familiar with a glacier or what groundwater is. So I would just need to make sure ahead of time that they're aware of all these words before we do the activity. Next slide. And another thing you might do, especially if you were going to include this with your middle school or even older students, is talk about how water is distributed on Earth. I did cover this briefly with my 5th graders, just not in detail, but we can see here the first column in green is looking at all of Earth's water, and then which 3% is fresh. The middle column is looking at the fresh water, which we have 68% in ice caps and glaciers, 30% groundwater, and the rest is surface water. And then we broke down that 0.3% of surface water in the blue column, 87% lakes, 11% swamps, 2% river. And next one. And of course, again, when I'm talking about the evaporation, condensation, precipitation, the students need to have some type of a visual or a model, because they're going to become a water molecule itself as that molecule goes through the water cycle. So they need to know evaporation, that the liquid is turning into a gas and going up into the sky. The condensation, the particles are slowing down, they're coming closer together, clumping together. And then precipitation, now the molecules are so heavy because they're clumped together that they're falling back to the earth in the liquid state. Runoff is where it's running down a surface into either a lake or a river or an ocean in this case. And then infiltration is where it's going into the groundwater itself. And next one, Marnie.
Oops,
and
sorry.
we wanted to show a quick video. This is, you can click on the video, Marnie.
Okay.
This is what it would look like. I found this is what this activity might look like in a 1st grade classroom. If you're watching it, the kids are very active. And again, these are little guys. I did this with my older kids, so they were kind of controlled how they moved a little bit more. One thing, I wouldn't have had the stools up like that on the table. I didn't think that's safe, but just to model the activity. And you can see the different stations have dice and they have paper at all the tables. The kids are rolling the dice, and then they're not writing anything down, but my older students did write down what they were doing. Okay, and Marnie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. There's a couple ways that you can do the activity with us today. I'll do a quick overview. And if you already have the materials at home, if you got your dice and your your station cards, you can, when we start the activity, you can actually roll your own dice and move around your room the way you would in a classroom. Or if you want to move along with us, we'll put that student page with all the stations and the possible places in the journey up on the screen as we're playing, and we'll do the dice roll for during the time that we're playing. You do want a water cycle scorecard, or if you don't have that, if you just grab a piece of paper and a pen, because this is how you'll track your journey as a water molecule through the water cycle. So you could go ahead and get that now. And if you've got the cards, if you've got the cards set up and cut, you might go ahead and place those around your space the way you would similar to in a classroom or the teaching space. So you get the sense of moving around the space as part of the activity. Your cards, when you make them, might look like this. They might have pictures where you can see a little visual aid, and then the stations, or they might just be the station written out the way we've done them. And these are all actually in the activity guide. So we'll start with an example of how you'd move through the activities, pretty straightforward. We'll ask everybody either in a teaching setting, in a classroom, to actually small groups start at various locations. So everybody's starting at a different station. It might be the groundwater, it might be the stream. And depending on your size class, you'll have a small groups there. But at each station, if you have several dice, every student, every participant can roll the dice individually. And that way everybody tracks a different journey through the water cycle. So the example here is showing starting at the cloud station. So if you would start there, you'd physically move to the cloud station and you'd write that down on the first line. Then a dice roll would bring you, if you rolled a 2 or a 1, what happens there is you fall as rain onto the ocean. And you write just a little quick summary of what happens, fall as rain. And some of them you have to shorten up because they're fairly long. And then your destination is ocean, jotting down ocean, then physically moving to ocean station, and then starting the next line with your ocean, and that's where you are. So if you want to go ahead now and choose your starting place, and again, if you're doing the cards around your space, you might want to walk over to that with your scorecard. And if you're going to go ahead and do the activity with us, we'll keep this posted up on the screen, and then you can see where the next move will take you. Okay, and we'll play for just a few minutes, but that'll be enough to get you through several of the stations. We probably won't get through all 10 stations. Okay, so we could go ahead and start. Jessica, are you going to do a time on this for us?
Sure. Do you want
to be
how
timing
much
us?
Do you like?
I think it's like 3 or 4 minutes. I think we can get through several. Okay, so if everybody's ready, again, if you've got your dice at home and you want to just walk through it for yourself, you can go ahead and start rolling your dice. And if you're going to go around with us, we'll start with the first roll of the dice, and it's a 2. So move from your station and look at where 2 would take you and jot it down. Okay, then I'm going to roll again, and the roll is 4. So you move to your next station. Okay. Then rolling again, 4 again. So sometimes you'll notice you'll end up at the same station for a bit. So rolling again, it's a 6. Okay. Roll again, and roll is 2. Next roll is 1. Roll again, 6. Roll again to 5.
And that'll put us at about 3 minutes.
Okay, and we've probably done about 7 stations. Yeah, let's do one more roll. And it's a 1. All right. We'll go into our breakout room in a minute, and we'll have the same sort of discussion we did after the tree cookies. But we'll talk just for a second about some of the language arts and reading connections that would go along with the Water Wonders activity. So one of the ones as shown in the activity guide is you could write a story about your journey, as a water molecule. Ask your students to do this. And this is a simplified version of what's in the book. And it just shows a journey that is a few stops, few stations, and then describing, just a simple little story describing where the molecule started and what it looked like or felt like moving through the different stages of the water cycle. So that's an option for language arts. And then there's another one, and Janet, if you want to talk about.
Absolutely. So as you can see, as Marnie's kind of flipping through the slides here, we're adding different books. But one thing that is really important with our students especially is that we're tying this in with our language arts connection. And sometimes I know with some of our teachers, especially the lower grade levels, the K1, 2, it's really hard to get science time. So this is a perfect tie-in with doing science, but tying in the literacy piece so we can get into language arts. But we see Drop of the Ocean, The Dinosaurs Drink This Water. Those are some fun books. Drop Around the World, Magic School Bus. My kids love the Magic School Bus, Little Raindrops. So many different things. And even for my upper level students, my middle school students, they actually still like the picture books and the little books, and they would engage even when I was teaching my gifted advanced students, they would still engage with these books. And it was just something that was fun for them to look at and engage with.
And I'm Karen. So Sue is going to share her screen so that we can get started with.
Good. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we could hear and see. It looks great. Thanks.
All right, here we go. We'll go through this quickly. So we're going to talk about the Web of Life. And if you look at this page, eventually when you hike through the guide, the green bar up top is really a quick overview of the activity, which is very helpful when you're kind of thumbing through the book in different sections to find out a good activity to use, maybe if you're in a hurry. It's a summary of the lesson. So this here is really what we would call your background information. So although we have our objective, which is to understand that ecosystems are made up of interdependent organisms and other components, you have your vocabulary list, and that's really, really important. However you introduce your vocabulary, it's obviously an important part of this lesson and most lessons. All of these vocabulary words can be found in the actual guide itself, except for the words biotic and abiotic, which is why we have them in italics. But Karen's going to talk a lot about the older students, and these would definitely be words that she would introduce. Me teaching the younger students, probably not so much. I keep forgetting I have to advance the slide, sorry. So right now, what I'd like everybody to do is think of some components that a forest would really need to be healthy. And you can unmute yourselves and just shout them out, or if you would rather feel more comfortable using the chat. I know Jessica's, or maybe even Karen can read that. I can't because I have my screen up, but just go ahead.
I've got you covered on the chat.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Think about some of those components that a forest really needs to be healthy.
I have a rain, controlled burns, healthy soil, decomposers.
Awesome, very good. Those are a lot more in depth than I thought. So there you go. That's awesome. Okay.
And those things that you mentioned will also, there we go. The sun and healthy trees were mentioned, and they'll rely on those other components. Space, biodiversity, excellent list, everybody.
And there, of course, are exactly most of the things that you came up with, and not half as many as you did actually. So absolutely, these would be some of the answers that you would be looking for. And you could also tie in some of these answers back to that vocabulary. How would that relate to that vocabulary? So now let's take a look really quickly at a very specific ecosystem. All right, Karen.
So the activity is talking about that interdependence, that connection that the organisms have, the living components, the biotic, and I'm going to use those terms, as well as the abiotic that you mentioned of the sun and the healthy soil and such. A lot of us will think about this activity as food, as the food webs, as at connections between the non-living components of it as well. So that can be added to this activity where, you know, the type of soil or the amount of rainfall or the amount of sunlight can be introduced. So this photograph that you're looking at here, some of you might be very familiar with what a flatwood is, what a pine flatwood, what a pine system is. Some of you may. So having a photograph to engage their brains, to start the brainstorm, will be helpful. Some of you can just look at this and be able to identify some of those organisms. So again, we're just going to use that chat or call it out, unmute yourselves, let us know what your voice sounds like out there, and name some things that we would find. Ready, go. Fungi. Anybody else? What kind of trees do we see there?
Use the picture as your clue.
To get us started. Yep, I see bacteria has come in.
Palmetto, longleaf pine, wiregrass.
Awesome. Thank you. We've got some plant species. We got the fungi in there. How about some animals? Mushrooms. I see the mushrooms specifically. Pine, palms, birds of different species. Yes, I think that's supposed to be deer, Marcia. Thank you. Go for tortoises. Excellent. Okay, very good. So we'll go on to the next slide. So we want to get the kids to become familiar with what is in these ecosystems. It can be any ecosystem that you might want to study. We're just using this as the example. So I've got a bunch of words on here that are items that would be found in this area. And if you're not familiar, it's okay, because this next slide is going to show you that we are providing for you. Yep, next slide. Oh,
I'm sorry,
our
Karen.
resource slide. I think we're missing a slide there. But anyway, we have resources. You're going to see a slide on here somewhere. We have cards that are shown. There it is right there. We have cards that you're going to be able to use to cut out or, you know, create a full page. And the students will have a photograph of the items in specifically a pine ecosystem. On the back side of those cards will be the information that you're seeing there. So it'll be a little summary of content specific to those organisms. Sue is going to share, you know, how she used that, but you'll also get a teacher, what I call a cheat sheet. So the data table on that slide is mimicking the resource cards. You as a teacher will have a summary of what's on those cards so that you can help guide this activity after we get out of this introduction stage. So back to the activity, we've got them thinking about it, and now Sue is going to have them start.
Yeah, so what they're going to do now is start their research, and that's where we're at in this phase of the activity right now. So once they've chosen and taken ownership of their particular abiotic or biotic person or thing, they're going to start doing some research. Now, this was done on a fourth grade level, excuse me, right here. And what I had them do was they had to pick 2 or 3 of the most important facts that they had about their particular organism and put them on these actual pictures, and they really took ownership. But some of the questions that you want to make sure that they ask, and they are found in the guide, where within the forest does this live? What does it eat? Or perhaps what eats them? What other organisms live with them in the forest? And how many animals depend on them? That's such a big, important question. And how does the animal influence its environment? Another important question. So really, even if it's on the 4th grade level, you can still have them really dive deeply into this research with that good question base. Am I here, Karen? Because I don't know
Okay.
what.
So what I'd like you to do is to take a look, hold up, just right there. Take a look at these words. Many of them are what you brainstormed. And in order to get to a food web, when they look at that research, they're going to start realizing when they share out with one another about their organism, they're going to say, hey, I'm the gopher tortoise and I have to have sandy soil, but I also provide habitat for a whole lot of other species, maybe even during a fire. So they're going to start seeing connections with themselves. So the food chain is that energy transfer I mentioned before. And I'd like you all, paper and pencil, start with the sun, because we know energy is coming from there to start with. Create a food chain for yourself using any of those items up there. And I'd like you to type your food chain in the chat for me. And I'm going to be about 60 seconds there. Can I see a first food chain? What relies on the sun? Okay, so how about somebody unmute themselves and give me an example? There they come. Okay, so I've got a wiregrass to the rabbit to the hawk. Excellent. Pine tree, nibbled on by the deer. Really good example. Gallberry with the rabbit to the red-tailed hawk. So you see that energy transfer. Excellent. There they come. Longleaf pine, rabbit, red-tailed hawk. So it all will start with that sun's energy, and then those of you in the higher levels can talk about trophic levels and, you know, so on and so forth. In middle school, we would be covering those. Oh, thank you, Miss LaCrissie. You ended up going back to a worm. So as a decomposer of that. So if you'll advance the slide, the food chains are part of this part of this activity as it's laid out, but it's going to be part of your natural conversation. This is just one example. And in a virtual setting, you can use that annotation and the kids can choose a different color and they can create their connections of this energy transfer. The next slide shows you, obviously, what would happen if you layered those. So it starts to look kind of like that web. The next slide is
I think Karen.
Picture. They can create a list of, the sun is the yellow strip. I know you can't read that, but it is their food chain. And these are just in different colors in a classroom setting. They each would have their own chain. They would link those together. You can have facts, other facts on there, like what Sue was just sharing with the cards. So this is just a variation of it. Then they get those connected together at a common link, such as the sun, and they're all spider webbing off. And then finally, if they share, you know, the deer are in 2 different chains, you connect them and you get that conglomerate on the bottom, which is a little hard to read. But that will take us to that next slide, where you're using the cards as the layout. And the kids, go ahead, there we go. And the string is used to use those connections. Now this can be put on a piece of paper with the words, or it could be put on a piece of paper with the pictures too. So virtually, you have easy ways to do this. But we want to show you this in action with a group of people. Okay.
Card up, and we're going to sit in a big circle here in the front. So come on up with your planter animal card. Okay, so everybody sit showing your card like this. Hold up your card so other people can see it. And we have a variety of plants and animals here. I see rabbit, grass, fox, sun, hawk, mouse, squirrel, bear, some leaves, a chipmunk. I have a ball of yarn here, and you've got cards with plants and animals and the sun. How do you think we can model a web of life? Anybody have any ideas? You're first, go ahead.
We can use the red string to connect it like a food chain.
Right, she said we can use the red yarn to connect things that the energy flows from one to the other. What does everything start with? The sun. Say that really loud. The sun. The sun. That's right. We're going to start with the sun. So I'm going to give the end of the string to Kevin here with the sun. And then, okay, so we talked about something that needs light to make its energy, to get its food. What should this go to next? All right, let's take it from the grass because the leaves also need the sun. Do we have any other plants? Where are our herbivores? Over to the grasshopper. What might eat a rabbit? What might eat a mouse? Hawk? Yes. Is this starting to look like a spider web?
Yes.
Yes.
Right here.
Yes, definitely. We have our web of life. And I want you to all hold your string a little bit tight right now. Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm going to give it a little tug. And if you can feel the tug, you tug. And we'll see who else feels the tug. When we gently tug and you feel the tug go through the food web, that shows how all of the plants and animals in the forest are interconnected and dependent on each other. What happens if one of our animals doesn't exist in the forest anymore? What happens if the squirrel doesn't exist? Go ahead and drop off. If you're a squirrel, let go of the yarn. So what about the animals that eat the squirrel, like the fox? So the fox has to let go of the yarn because you're dependent, you're eating that. What about our hawk who likes to eat squirrels? Kevin, could you repeat what you said nice and loud?
Each animal depends on the other.
Each animal depends on the other. That's right. It's all interconnected in our web of life. So just a final question to wrap up. We're going to talk a little bit about biodiversity. Anybody know what biodiversity means?
Biodiversity means different types of life.
Right. Right. Bio meaning life. It's a different types of life in a forest. So if you have a lot of biodiversity, you've got a lot of different types of plants and animals in the forest. And if you have low biodiversity, then there might only be a few different types of plants and animals. Like say there was only oak trees in the forest and only deer, squirrel, mice, and hawks. So if something happens to the mice in the forest, would that have a big effect on the forest or a little effect? Right, so the fewer species there are, the bigger the negative effect. So it's good to have a lot of biodiversity or high biodiversity. So really good job today with that activity. And what we're going to do in art class is we're going to make a big mural.
Awesome. So you all can see how the two-dimensional string art is what they did physically three-dimensionally. So Jessica, I think we need to turn it back to you to decide, because of timing, how we want to close this out.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Karen and Sue. And I saw a lot of really great ideas in the chat, creating a food web mural, creating, let's see here. And I've done it with elementary to high school, hanging mobile style as well. So there's lots of ways to adopt this activity. And in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and skip the breakout room discussion. I know that everybody really enjoyed that first round, and I'm sorry that we don't have time for more. But do be thinking about the same questions that we discussed in the tree cookies activity. How would you modify? How could you do this differently for virtual or in person? There's lots of great ways to modify. So I'm going to pull up our closing presentation here. Okay, so I just wanted to share with you some resources that are available to you as a PLT educator. The Florida Project Learning Tree website. Just get this up here.
You'll have to unshare. Okay, there you go.
Is it up now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the Florida Project, and I will be sending you links to all of our contact information, our website, our social media pages. But our website is a great place to go, especially if you are a formal educator and looking for those standards correlations. So I want to walk you through how to access those on our website. If you go to menu and then curriculum, and then click on the standards correlations tab, you'll see that there are sections for different curriculum guides or modules. The training today is focused on the pre-K through 8 environmental education activity guide. And there is an introduction that explains how to use the standards correlations, and then you can download it either in PDF or Excel. And you will see how they are grouped by the different parts of the activity and then by subject. And so you can find the activity and look for the standards. If you are looking for a specific standard, you can also use the search feature either in Adobe or Excel to find that specific standard. So please let us know if you have any questions about using those resources or anything related to the standards correlations. The National PLT site is also a very important resource to you in terms of extensions and student pages related to the activities you will be using. So when you access the online course, you will be creating a login. And it doesn't cost anything, but you just create a login. And once you create your login, I already have mine created, but you'll come down here, enter your information and create a login. These tabs on the left are some great resources. You can access some free PLT curriculum. We mentioned the forest and climate change and the teaching with iTree modules. But a really important tab to remember is this access resources for PLT lessons. You can find a section for each curriculum guide and then looks for specific activities. So if we went to activity 44, Water Wonders, you will see that you can download all of the student pages that you saw today and that you used today in PDF format, so you don't have to bother with trying to copy them out of the guide. And there are great additional resources, including STEM connections, links to different technology resources, interactive water cycle videos, all kinds of things relevant to the activity. So just be sure to access the website when you're using an activity to see if there are additional things you might want to utilize. I will be sending you information on how to access the online course, but I wanted to quickly walk you through that. Once you have created your account at shopplt.org, and again, you'll have a PDF that have very detailed instructions on this. You go to you go to access code. This access code you will receive from information@plt.org, and it's specific to you. You'll enter that access code and say enable, and then you'll go to my content, and you'll see the PLT, Florida PLT Virtual Training Part 2 online training and ebook. So you'll click on online training, and that will take you to the course, and you won't see quite that much because I have more than one course on here, and you'll see the modules in here. When you access the ebook, you will have to enter a password, and that's the same password that you use to set up your online account. So the online course is completely self-paced. You do it at your own time. There are a welcome to PLT module, a hike through the guide. You'll do one more activity called How Big is Your Tree? And you'll complete a training action plan and complete a survey. So again, you will receive access to the ebook through the online training. If you are interested in a hard copy book, when you fill out the evaluation at the end of the online course, you will have an opportunity to say you would like to be mailed a hard copy of the guide as well, and we will get you that in the mail. So be sure to stay connected with us. And again, I will share this information after the course. As a recap today, we got started a little late, so thanks for bearing with us with the technical difficulties, but you learned a little bit about PLT. We went on a wonderful virtual tree ID hike of the UCF Arboretum with Dana. We experienced 4 PLT activities, discussed and shared ideas for using PLT, and learned about resources that are available to you. You will receive a certificate of completion once you finish the online course. And again, if there are any difficulties or problems with the course, please do send me an email. And that is it. So we're all finished. Be on the lookout for 2 emails this afternoon, one from information@plt.org with your access code for the online course, and one from me with instructions and additional resources. On the Web of Life activity, Karen showed the chart that shows the connections of all the organisms, as well as those different cards. And we will have that up and available for you. The tree treasure and the tree product cards will be available, as well as the Water Wonders water cycle scorecards, or station cards, I mean. And then if there's anything else that you saw during the webinar that you'd be interested in, just let us know and we'll be happy to share. So thank you so much for joining us and for your patience with the technology issues. And we really enjoyed having you here, and thank you for being so engaged, and have a wonderful afternoon.